Classic Audiobooks Library presents The Cask of Amontillado, written by Edgar Allan Poe, narrated by Rupert Glenn. Where in the world are you listening from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. I love seeing how far these stories go. Let's begin. Introduction. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. This is the only explanation Montresor offers as a motive for the vicious revenge he enacts against Fortunato in Edgar Allan Poe's The Cask of Amontillado. Like many of Poe's protagonists, Montresor seems pathologically obsessed with a single objective that he pursues without clear reason or rationale: to murder Fortunato by burying him alive in catacombs beneath an Italian palazzo. In writing The Cask of Amontillado, Poe's intent is to horrify readers, and in this he succeeds. But it is not only the subject matter and atmosphere of the story that achieves this effect. Poe's story, his words and the images they create, has the ability to sink into the reader's subconscious, to enter the mind and rattle the bones, because every element of the story is woven together to achieve Poe's singular objective: achieving a horrific effect. In 1846, Graham's American Monthly Magazine of Literature and Art published an essay Poe had written called The Philosophy of Composition. In it, Poe offers guidelines that both instruct writers how to write great poems and illustrates the careful planning and precision that he claims went into his own work. Using his famous poem, The Raven, Poe argues that each element in a story should contribute to unity of effect or impression, creating in readers a particular emotional response. For this reason, he believed that all great literary works must begin with a singular intention and consideration of effect. Only with the denouement in view can the writer give consequence, cause, or unified tone to the development of a story. This unity of impression can only be achieved if readers can experience the work in one sitting. Therefore, he claims that short works, poems and stories are the most effective. Poe justifies his use of melancholic themes by discussing beauty, the sole legitimate province of the poem. In exploring beauty, a poem can bypass the intellect and heart and elevate the soul. He contends that supreme beauty, and its supreme development by a skilled writer, will always evoke feelings of sensitivity and powerful emotions. Thus, only melancholy can be the appropriate tone for a beautiful poem. This theory perfectly matches The Raven, a heartbreaking work about a man mourning the loss of his beloved Lenore and contemplating his own mortality when faced with a supernatural speaking raven. Yet when Poe's claim about beauty is considered in the tradition of the Macabre short stories that would follow this great work, it seems less clear. Can there be beauty in vengeance, murder, and insanity? The answer to these questions posed to any reader would most likely be no. However, the meticulous planning that Poe lays out in Philosophy begins to offer an explanation of how carefully constructed words can lend beauty to even the darkest of places. What Poe is getting at in this essay is the coherence of thought, the almost pathological, perhaps obsessive, focus on a single tone and objective to which all words, sentences, characters, settings, and even word sounds must cleave. Using countless revisions and clear intentions, Poe created unity throughout all of the elements of his short stories, and there is no better example of this technique than The Cask of Amontillado. The methodical way Montresor plans and carries out his scheme to punish Fortunato is mirrored in the deliberate use of verbs and adjectives that have ominous connotations which underscore the unspoken elements of the story. Carnival is not chaotic, it is madness. The catacombs do not smell bad, they are filled with a foulness of the air. Fortunato does not stop at the end of the tunnel, his progress is arrested by the rock. These word choices are not accidents, but the result of a carefully crafted development of intention. Poe uses such words, sounds, and atmosphere to create a palpable image within the reader's head that evokes a visceral response to the story's effect. As Neil Gaiman states, it is beautiful and it is the stuff of nightmare. The horror in the narrative is developed through not only Montresor's act of revenge, but the ambiguity surrounding this grisly event. Montresor lures Fortunato into the catacombs beneath an Italian palazzo by promising him a taste from the cask of an extremely rare Amontillado sherry. Fortunato's arrogance and foolish nature make it possible for Montresor to succeed in carrying out his carefully crafted scheme. Poe juxtaposes Montresor's gruesome thoughts with Fortunato's innocent, drunken obliviousness to create dramatic irony that increases the audience's horror. Furthermore, even the motivation for Montresor's actions are as unclear as his reasons for sharing the story. Varying interpretations of Montresor's tone and confessional style have divided scholars on the character's mental state and purpose of the story. Does he visit the vault 50 years later because he is tormented by guilt and driven to confession? Or does he take pleasure in recounting his successful vengeance? As the story explores the depth of Montresor's depravity in avenging a personal insult, we descend deeper into his disturbed mind, having become intimate accomplices to his actions from the very beginning. You who so well know the nature of my soul. Montresor begins with this direct address to simultaneously absorb the audience as his confidant and obscure the details of the story. From the beginning, he withholds information from the reader, speaking to us as if we already know why he murdered Fortunato and as if we are complicit in his actions. This obscurity adds to the irony of Montresor's narrative style. He juxtaposes meticulous descriptions of the setting with cryptic presentations of both characters, their relationship, and the very motive for the savage murder. The first-person narration makes the story more intimate and believable. So much so that the reader momentarily forgets the impossibilities within Montresor's account. His perfect reconstruction of the dialogue 50 years later, his ability to remember every detail of the catacombs, his precise memory of Fortunato's last words and facial expressions. Montresor's narration is eerie, almost monstrous in its perfection. The reader witnesses gruesome revenge at the end of the story, with no other explanation than what can be inferred about Montresor's motives and character from the psychopath's own twisted words. Readers are, in a sense, just as much ensnared and misled by the end of the story as Fortunato is to his tomb. This chilling effect is a result of the haunting situational and verbal irony that permeates the story. It begins situated in the boisterous celebrations of Carnival. Poe juxtaposes the joyful setting of Carnival with the dark, damp catacombs where Montresor will enact his heinous revenge. The irony in this juxtaposition permeates even the basic elements of the story. For instance, Fortunato's name means fortunate one. His untimely demise makes his name grimly ironic, as does Montresor's greeting when he first sees him. You are luckily met. Fortunato remains ignorant to Montresor's motives throughout the story, adding to the irony with his actions. He toasts the dead of the catacombs, not knowing that he will shortly be one of them. He mocks Montresor, using a sign of the Masons, not realizing that Montresor intends to kill him because of such insults. Montresor ironically uses a trowel, the symbol of the Masons, to entomb Fortunato. He kills Fortunato with the very insult lodged against him. Poe expertly uses these ironies to move past the logical conclusions of the text. This creates a cryptic feeling throughout the story that forces the reader to question everything Montresor has claimed to be true. Nothing is what it seems. Without a logical conclusion or motive for the main action, the reader begins to question whether or not they are themselves trapped in ironies and being led through a tangled catacomb, just as Fortunato is, with nothing but dead ends without answers waiting for them. A classic tale of deception and revenge, the Cask of Amontillado undoubtedly showcases Poe's mastery as a storyteller. His pathological attention to detail and deft use of irony arrests the reader's imagination in order to evoke a palpable feeling of revulsion. Poe creates the perfect short story as every sentence and word contributes to the tale's overall theme and effect, and forces us to examine human nature and the darkness to be found in the human psyche. For this reason, the Cask of Amontillado has served as a basis for many conventions of the modern short story form. The Cask of Amontillado. The 1,000 injuries of Fortunato I had borne as I best could, but when he ventured upon insult, I vowed revenge. You, who so well know the nature of my soul, will not suppose, however, that I gave utterance to a threat. At length I would be avenged. This was a point definitely settled, but the very definitiveness with which it was resolved precluded the idea of risk. I must not only punish, but punish with impunity. A wrong is unredressed when retribution overtakes its redresser. It is equally unredressed when the avenger fails to make himself felt as such to him who has done the wrong. It must be understood that neither by word nor deed had I given Fortunato cause to doubt my goodwill. I continued, as was my wont, to smile in his face, and he did not perceive that my smile now was at the thought of his immolation. He had a weak point, this Fortunato, although in other regards he was a man to be respected and even feared. He prided himself on his connoisseurship in wine. Few Italians have the true virtuoso spirit. For the most part, their enthusiasm is adopted to suit the time and opportunity to practice imposture upon the British and Austrian millionaires. In painting and gemmery, Fortunato, like his countrymen, was a quack, but in the matter of old wines he was sincere. In this respect I did not differ from him materially. I was skillful in the Italian vintages myself, and bought largely whenever I could. It was about dusk, one evening during the supreme madness of the carnival season, that I encountered my friend. He accosted me with excessive warmth, for he had been drinking much. The man wore motley. He had on a tight-fitting party-striped dress, and his head was surmounted by the conical cap and bells. I was so pleased to see him that I thought I should never have done wringing his hand. I said to him, "My dear Fortunato, you are luckily met. How remarkably well you are looking today. But I have received a pipe of what passes for Amontillado, and I have my doubts." "How?" said he. "Amontillado, a pipe? Impossible, and in the middle of the carnival." "I have my doubts," I replied, "and I was silly enough to pay the full Amontillado price without consulting you in the matter. You were not to be found, and I was fearful of losing a bargain." "Amontillado!" "I have my doubts." "Amontillado!" "And I must satisfy them." "Amontillado!" "As you are engaged, I am on my way to Lucchesi. If anyone has a critical turn, it is he. He will tell me, Lucchesi cannot tell Amontillado from sherry, and yet some fools will have it that his taste is a match for your own. Come, let us go." "Whither?" "To your vaults." "My friend, no. I will not impose upon your good nature. I perceive you have an engagement. Lucchesi." "I have no engagement. Come." "My friend, no. It is not the engagement, but the severe cold with which I perceive you are afflicted. The vaults are insufferably damp. They are encrusted with nitre. Let us go, nevertheless. The cold is merely nothing. Amontillado, you have been imposed upon. And as for Lucchesi, he cannot distinguish sherry from Amontillado." Thus speaking, Fortunato possessed himself of my arm, and putting on a mask of black silk and drawing a roquelaire closely about my person, I suffered him to hurry me to my palazzo. There were no attendants at home. They had absconded to make merry in honour of the time. I had told them that I should not return until the morning, and had given them explicit orders not to stir from the house. These orders were sufficient, I well knew, to ensure their immediate disappearance, one and all, as soon as my back was turned. I took from their sconces 2 flambeaux, and giving one to Fortunato, bowed him through several suites of rooms to the archway that led into the vaults. I passed down a long and winding staircase, requesting him to be cautious as he followed. We came at length to the foot of the descent, and stood together upon the damp ground of the catacombs of the Montresor. The gait of my friend was unsteady, and the bells upon his cap jingled as he strode. "The pipe," he said. "It is farther on," said I. but observe the white webwork which gleams from these cavern walls." He turned towards me and looked into my eyes with two filmy orbs that distilled the rheum of intoxication. "Nitre?" he asked at length. "Nitre?" I replied. "How long have you had that cough?" "Ah, ah, 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 ah." My poor friend found it impossible to reply for many minutes. "It is nothing," he said at last. "Come," I said with decision. "We will go back. Your health is precious. You are rich, respected, admired, beloved. You are happy, as once I was. You are a man to be missed. For me it is no matter. We will go back. You will be ill, and I cannot be responsible. Besides, there is Lucchesi." "Enough," he said. "The cough's a mere nothing. It will not kill me. I shall not die of a cough." "True, true," I replied, "and indeed I had no intention of alarming you unnecessarily, but you should use all proper caution. A draught of this Medoc will defend us from the damps." Here I knocked off the neck of a bottle which I drew from a long row of its fellows that lay upon the mould. "Drink," I said, presenting him the wine. He raised it to his lips with a leer. He paused and nodded to me familiarly while his bells jingled. "I drink," he said, "to the buried that repose around us." "And I to your long life." He again took my arm and we proceeded. "These vaults," he said, "are extensive." "The Montresors," I replied, "were a great and numerous family." "I forget your arms." "A huge human foot door in a field azure. The foot crushes a serpent rampant whose fangs are embedded in the heel." "And the motto?" "Nemo me impune lacessit." "Good," he said. The wine sparkled in his eyes and the bells jingled. My own fancy grew warm with the Medoc. We had passed through long walls of piled skeletons, with casks and puncheons intermingling, into the inmost recesses of the catacombs. I paused again, and this time I made bold to seize Fortunato by an arm above the elbow. "The nitre," I said. "See, it increases. It hangs like moss upon the vaults. We are below the river's bed. The drops of moisture trickle among the bones. Come, we will go back ere it is too late. Your cough." "It is nothing," he said. "Let us go on, but first another draught of the Medoc." I broke and reached him a flagon of de Grave. He emptied it at a breath. His eyes flashed with a fierce light. He laughed and threw the bottle upwards with a gesticulation I did not understand. I looked at him in surprise. He repeated the movement, a grotesque one. "You do not comprehend," he said. "Not I replied. "Then you are not of the Brotherhood." "How?" "You are not of the Masons." Yes, I said. Yes. "You? Impossible! A Mason!" "A Mason," I replied. "A sign," he said, "a sign." "It is this," I answered, producing a trowel from beneath the folds of my roquelaire. "You jest," he exclaimed, recoiling a few paces. "But let us proceed to the Amontillado." "Be it so," I said, replacing the tool beneath the cloak, and again offering him my arm. He leaned upon it heavily. We continued our route in search of the Amontillado. We passed through a range of low arches, descended, passed on, and descending again arrived at a deep crypt in which the foulness of the air caused our flambeaux rather to glow than flame. At the most remote end of the crypt there appeared another, less spacious. Its walls had been lined with human remains, piled to the vault overhead, in the fashion of the great catacombs of Paris. 3 sides of this interior crypt were still ornamented in this manner. From the 4th side the bones had been thrown down and lay promiscuously upon the earth, forming at one point a mound of some size. Within the wall thus exposed by the displacing of the bones we perceived a still interior crypt or recess, in depth about 4 feet, in width 3, in height 6 or 7. It seemed to have been constructed for no especial use within itself, but formed merely the interval between 2 of the colossal supports of the roof of the catacombs, and was backed by one of their circumscribing walls of solid granite. It was in vain that Fortunato, uplifting his dull torch, endeavoured to pry into the depth of the recess. Its termination the feeble light did not enable us to see. "Proceed," I said. "Herein is the Amontillado. As for Lucchesi—" "He is an ignoramus," interrupted my friend, as he stepped unsteadily forward, while I followed immediately at his heels. In niche, and finding an instant he had reached the extremity of the niche, and finding his progress arrested by the rock, stood stupidly bewildered. A moment more, and I had fettered him to the granite. In its surface were 2 iron staples, distant from each other about 2 feet, horizontally. From one of these depended a short chain, from the other a padlock. Throwing the links about his waist, it was but the work of a few seconds to secure it. He was too much astounded to resist. Withdrawing the key, I stepped back from the recess. "Pass your hand," I said, "over the wall. You cannot help feeling the nitre. Indeed, it is very damp. Once more, let me implore you to return." "No, then I must positively leave you, but I must first render you all the little attentions in my power." "The Amontillado!" ejaculated my friend, not yet recovered from his astonishment. "True," I replied, "the Amontillado." As I said these words, I busied myself among the pile of bones of which I have before spoken. Throwing them aside, I soon uncovered a quantity of building stone and mortar. With these materials, and with the aid of my trowel, I began vigorously to wall up the entrance of the niche. I had scarcely laid the first tier of the masonry when I discovered that the intoxication of Fortunato had in a great measure worn off. The earliest indication I had of this was a low, moaning cry from the depth of the recess. It was not the cry of a drunken man. There was then a long and obstinate silence. I laid the second tier, and the third, and the fourth, and then I heard the furious vibrations of the chain. The noise lasted for several minutes, during which, that I might hearken to it with the more satisfaction, I ceased my labours and sat down upon the bones. When at last the clanking subsided, I resumed the trowel, and finished without interruption the 5th, the 6th, and the 7th tier. The wall was now nearly upon a level with my breast. I again paused, and holding the flambeau over the mason-work, threw a few feeble rays upon the figure within. A succession of loud and shrill screams, bursting suddenly from the throat of the chained form, seemed to thrust me violently back. For a brief moment I hesitated. I trembled. Unsheathing my rapier, I began to grope with it about the recess, but the thought of an instant reassured me. I placed my hand upon the solid fabric of the catacombs and felt satisfied. I reapproached the wall. I replied to the yells of him who clamoured. I re-echoed. I aided. I surpassed them in volume and in strength. I did this, and the clamourer grew still. It was now midnight, and my task was drawing to a close. I had completed the 8th, the 9th, and the 10th tier. I had finished a portion of the last and the 11th. There remained but a single stone to be fitted and plastered in. I struggled with its weight. I placed it partially in its destined position. But now there came from out the niche a low laugh that erected the hairs upon my head. It was succeeded by a sad voice, which I had difficulty in recognizing as that of the noble Fortunato. The voice said, "Ha ha ha ha, he, a very good joke indeed, an excellent jest. We will have many a rich laugh about it at the palazzo. He, over our wine. He. The Amontillado," I said. He, yes, the Amontillado. But is it not getting late? Will not they be awaiting us at the palazzo, the Lady Fortunato and the rest? Let us be gone. "Yes," I said, "let us be gone. For the love of God, Montresor." "Yes," I said, "for the love of God." But to these words I hearkened in vain for a reply. I grew impatient. I called aloud, "Fortunato!" No answer. I called again, "Fortunato!" No answer still. I thrust a torch through the remaining aperture and let it fall within. There came forth in return only a jingling of the bells. My heart grew sick. It was the dampness of the catacombs that made it so. I hastened to make an end of my labour. I forced the last stone into its position. I plastered it up. Against the new masonry I re-erected the old rampart of bones. For the half of a century no mortal has disturbed them. In pace requiescat. This concludes the end of the story. Thank you for listening to Classic Audiobooks Library. To hear more free stories like this, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. We hope you'll join us again for more timeless stories and original works. Until next time.